All right, everyone. Good morning. I hope that this message finds everybody well, and I'm very glad, appreciate you joining us today for the follow-up webinar to the one that we had on April 8th. So today's topic around COVID-19 deals with looking ahead. It's been a month since the last webinar that we had, and what we're going to be talking about today is how can we re-engage in the communities where we are doing work, and how to make sure that we're protecting our health, protecting the health of the ones that we are working with, and also how to make sure that we're doing it in a responsible manner, trying to hit goals today. So let me go over the agenda very quickly. So our panelists today include Kristol Sims, Director of Energy Efficiency and Innovation for Ameren Illinois, and Karen Guz, Director of Water Conservation at San Antonio Water Systems. They'll be providing us an update on their presentation from a month ago to talk through how things have gone over the past month, the changes that they've made in their approach, and also how they are looking ahead to the future. Ashley Palladino and Jeff Crittenden from Resource Innovations will be talking to us about, as an implementer, the adjustments that they are making and a framework for making adjustments to be able to work in a restricted access or more socially distanced environment. And then I will close out with a discussion on prepping your programs for being digitized, whether you're going to do it yourselves or you're going to request that of a third party. There's a good amount of work to be done, and the requests for proposals that we see don't really give us all the information as a technology vendor to be able to give you an accurate quote and reasonably estimate the time and the cost. And so I'll be providing a framework and approach to help you figure out how to get better information. So let's just go over the Zoom webinar very quickly. In the past month, Zoom has made a lot of adjustments in order to improve security details. Those of you saw that I tried to switch us to Microsoft Live events, and I will acknowledge that Microsoft did not make it easy for me to do that, unfortunately. So for those who are dialing in, because Zoom is still not an accepted platform in your utility IT departments, I apologize, I did my best. But I am recording the session and we'll be able to make it available to everybody once this webinar is done. So just a couple of Zoom webinar details. First of all, if you have a question, so first of all, I just want to make sure that everybody can raise their hands in the Zoom webinar panel. So if everybody would go ahead and hit the raise your hand button, great. So if you want us to make sure that you've got a question that you posted into Q&A, please go ahead and raise that hand, and we will go ahead and take a look. Go ahead and lower them now if you can. Thank you. Second of all, there's an open meeting chat, and so if you need to reach the panelists or me during the course of the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and post a message in the chat window. And finally, there is a Q&A section. I believe that you can post a question anonymously. You can also post it with your name. We, in the course of the presentation, will look to answer your questions, but in the discussion portion towards the end, we will be going back to those questions to provide answers. So before we get started, I just want to see, go ahead and post in chat if you have any questions for me before we go ahead and get started. All right, looks like we're all good. Let's go ahead and begin. So if we think about where we were, for those of us who were here, thank you, David. If we think about where we were a month ago, it's been 4 weeks since we had this initial webinar and started thinking about what was going on with COVID. And I don't know about anybody else, but it feels like a year. I'm sure that other people can identify with that. actually, let's do this. For all those people who feel like the past month has felt like a lot more than a month, go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah, that's a common feeling, I think, for all of us to be having right now. The stay-at-home measures that we put in place, I would say, have accomplished the objective of what was called back then flattening the curve. If you take a look at IHME data and their projections back on April 8th about what resources would be necessary in terms of beds, ICU beds, invasive ventilators, you can see that the y-axis had a peak below 300,000. And if you look at where we are today, and actually this was yesterday, it's at 100,000. So by implementing the stay-at-home measures, we have significantly slowed the spread of coronavirus cases and requirements of resources from what we anticipated they would be. So the result of all of our efforts has been to limit across the country the number of cases that we're going to have. Where we are right now is that the number of daily cases that we have is it's in a repeating cycle. And so rather than it being a clear continued increase or a clear continued decrease, we seem to be in a Sunday to Saturday cycle of a pattern where the number of cases getting reported, probably just because of the amount of time it takes for test results to get submitted back to people and then reported, we're seeing a peak. So for people who are waiting until Monday to get tested, and then perhaps the results come out formally in a couple of days, that's what that may be contributing to the pattern that we see, and most of the folks are repeating this. Just as a quick check, and just to think about this, not just from a numbers perspective, but from a personal impact perspective. These are people that we're talking about, obviously. And for those of you who may have somebody who, either a loved one or a family member, or not to say that those are distinct, or friends or colleagues who are recovering from the disease right now, I hope that they get better. For people who have lost a loved one or have lost a colleague, I hope that their memory is a blessing for you. My sister lost a good longtime friend from college. For those of you who are looking at the news, this is in fact the woman who was the doctor from New York City who took her life as a result of the mental fatigue associated with the disease. And so this has been a big deal. And even if you don't have somebody who is recovering or has the case, just the background anxiety and the background noise of what's going on in the country can have a significant effect on everybody. And so as we move forward in all of this, as we've tried to stay focused on what's the job that we're doing and how do we do it the best, I just want to acknowledge that for everybody, there's a drumbeat behind us, and that is tiring and hard to deal with. And so for those of you who said that it's felt like a long time, I just want to acknowledge that this is difficult for everybody. And again, I'm glad that you're here with us today. So you can see that states are starting to push reopening. The final data point associated with all of this is the economic consequence of the stay-at-home orders and the push to restore the economy so that people have their jobs again, have revenue, have income, have health care. And so a number of states, rightly are moving for an opening. And we'll go ahead and talk through that, or actually I'll have a poll question just to see where all of you are in this. And so given that we're talking about reopening, a good portion of this webinar is going to center around how is that going to work, what are we going to do, and how to make that go smoothly. And then the final thing is that reopening does bring uncertainty. So if I go back to the same IHME data set and then we look at the metric deaths per day, you can see that there's a big cloud of uncertainty surrounding the projections associated with what's going to happen or what could happen once we release the stay-at-home orders. In my hometown of Austin, we have some very good examples of people behaving badly that have made the national news once things have reopened. I anticipate that there's a lot of people who will continue to do so. And we're going to have to figure out how to acknowledge that as we move forward. So in terms of resources to think about how to protect ourselves and the people that we're looking to serve, OSHA has guidance on preparing workplaces for COVID-19. They break out controls into these different categories: engineering, administrative, safe work practices, and personal protective equipment. There's been a lot of focus on the latter two, but the former two are actually very important. And then they also helpfully identify an occupational risk pyramid. So not every worker is going to be at the same level of risk, and therefore not every control is going to be required. And so they go from healthcare workers in the emergency rooms at a very high exposure risk. Jobs requiring frequent and or close contact with people who may be infected but are not known patients are medium exposure. This includes teachers, anybody who's going to be working in a group environment and they don't know whether somebody may be asymptomatic. In our industry, that would also include people who are doing site visits, especially if social distancing is not being implemented. And then lower exposure risk, do not require contact with people known to be patients, is a lot of the office settings that we're talking about, especially if social distancing is implemented within those offices. And so most of what you will be looking at are a medium or a lower exposure risk, unless you're doing a site visit in a hospital, for example, in which case you would be at a high or very high exposure risk, and the PPE that you should be wearing is going to be a function of kind of your risk profile. So what was interesting to me is that if there's a low exposure risk, engineering controls at this time are not recommended. So things like high efficiency filters or HEPA filters, not recommended in a setting with low exposure risk, although if you have an HVAC system that is mixing air across different risk profiles, then that's something that you should be taking into account. The only administrative controls are to make sure that you monitor information and require workers to have that excess information, and to make sure that people who are sick go home. And then PPE are not recommended for a low exposure risk. In a medium exposure risk, they're recommending physical barriers, face masks for ill employees only, limit access to the work site and face-to-face contact, and then PPE, depending upon what's going on in your environment, can be a combination of gloves, gown, face mask, and or face shield or goggles. And that has an implication for people who are doing site visits and are going to need to be around other people if they don't know what their symptoms may be for site visits. And so this is some of the information that should be considered as you're looking at resuming operations in the field. And then finally, I just want to acknowledge that, things are happening in the background that can help us going forward. And where we are right now, vaccine or no vaccine, is not an indication of where we're going to be. A quick example is that there's research being done where it's possible to monitor the genetic material of the coronavirus in wastewater, and being able to do it depending upon which individual section of the distribution grid that you're on. In the Netherlands specifically, this approach detected COVID-19 up to 6 days before the first actual confirmed case. And so the implementation of this kind of monitoring network doesn't necessarily correlate to the number of people who have the disease, but it identifies that it's starting to be there before hotspots are identified. And that way, resources could be deployed quickly, especially in that neighborhood. And so, individual testing is not the only way that we're going to be able to doing things like contact and contact tracing. And so at the same time that we are addressing or just managing our response to this, we're going to be getting smarter and better on how we handle things. So as we did last time, I want to spend a little bit of time checking in with folks to see how things are going and where you're coming from. So the first question, and we'll go ahead and launch this poll, is where you are now. What status does your state have toward reopening? So for all of you who are here today, please let us know where things are. All right, we'll wait another minute for people to get their responses in, try to shoot for at least half of our attendees to respond. All right, let me go ahead and stop the poll and then share the results. So what you can see, and just want to confirm everybody can see this, is that most of you are in a partially reopened setting, but another good chunk of you aren't there yet, where reopening is under discussion or the stay-at-home orders are in place indefinitely. So there's a mix of you in terms of what you're looking ahead to do, but a relatively small number of you are in a place where stay-at-home is going to be driven for a long period of time. All right. Let me go ahead to the next poll. So this is an interesting one. For those of you who have goals that are set by public commissions or by your boards, has anyone relaxed your program performance goals for 2020, acknowledging where you are? All right, waiting for just a few more. Okay, great. This is like microwaving your popcorn, waiting for the last kernels to stop popping. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at what this is. So the majority of you, the answer is no. And so you're staring at the same goals that you originally were intended to have this year. There are a few of you, actually a good number of you, where it's under discussion. For those who are answering yes, if you wouldn't mind in the chat window during the course of this discussion to provide any details that you can share on kind of what the decision was and what the justification was, I'm sure that everybody would be interested in hearing that. I've been in discussions with Kristol, one of our panelists, about what to do about this. I would imagine that at a minimum, for states where you have things like free ridership, that there should be some kind of consideration around exactly how much free ridership is happening in the current economic climate if you continue to get people to pursue energy efficiency. All right, let me go ahead and stop these share results and move on to the next poll. So next question for everyone. How many of you have made a switch to virtual delivery of programs, especially replacing site visits with web calls? All right, let me go ahead and share the results here. So many of you have gone ahead and made a switch to virtual delivery, and we'll have a good conversation here from our panelists on how, on what the results of their efforts have been and what they've learned. For those who are, looking at it from an under discussion perspective, or even for those who haven't, we'll have information here on, what has been done and how that has gone, so that you can understand the different ways that people have approached it. And then the final poll, and I'm just curious about that. So how many of you are doing this from your office as opposed to being at home? So are you back at work at your office? All right. Okay. So not surprisingly, most of you are at home for this. And the truth is that in my specific circumstance, with my company, we have been operating at home, and the justification to require people to come in is feeling a little arbitrary at this point. So I imagine that it's going to be a very interesting conversation we're all going to get into about if things continue to operate with the distributed workforce, why exactly do we need everybody else to come in? So it's going to be a pretty interesting next, hold on a second here. Let me go back to the poll and make sure. There we go. It's going to be an interesting couple of months. All right. So what I would like to do now is to start the conversation with our other panelists. And I have a presentation from Kristol Sims here. So let me go ahead and turn off my video. There we go. And Kristol, go ahead and let me know how you'd like me to proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good morning to everyone. Again, I'm Kristol Sims, Director of Energy Efficiency for Ameren Illinois. We can go to the next slide. So I will not give too much background about our program here at Ameren Illinois, just to give you a sense of the type of program that we deliver. We have both an electric and gas energy efficiency portfolio at Ameren Illinois. You can see we serve most of the state of Illinois in terms of geography, but in terms of population, we don't serve the same population as the northern utilities in the Chicagoland area. And our program is around $114 million annually on gas and electric. That's a big typo that I caught this morning, but we can go to the next slide. So what I wanted to do was give a brief overview on where we are now, a few weeks after our last discussion about this topic, kind of give an update on some of the decisions that we have made affirmatively, and then some of the things that we're considering. Just in terms of the primary considerations for the decisions that we're making, we certainly are prioritizing safety first and foremost. And as Jonathan emphasized before, that safety goes not only to our employees, but also to our vendors and contractors and the communities that we work in and serve. We certainly don't want to be a part of any issue related to spreading of the virus, and so we are taking that into consideration. We also are very focused on gathering information as a company and as a program. So as a company, we've initiated a pulse survey, reaching out to customers, and so far we've been doing that for about a week, and some of the results are pretty staggering, and even after just a week, we found that of the respondents, 59% of those customers have indicated that they have already been negatively impacted financially due to the coronavirus outbreak. And that's pretty significant, and of that 59%, 73 of them are somewhat or very concerned about their ability to pay their utility bill, which just to us makes the importance of energy efficiency even that more focused and indicates a real need of our customer base for these programs to be available. In terms of adjustments on the residential side, we are pursuing various virtual solutions, including, as Jonathan indicated before, including having those interactions with customers by web or by phone. And then also we are launching a virtual assessment tool, working with our implementation contractor to have a walkthrough with customers, a very targeted and assisted assessment with the customers on one end and our program staff on the other. On the business side, we still have program allies and customers who can continue projects. It's really up to the customer about how they want to proceed and if they want to pursue opportunities related to energy efficiency. We are taking efforts to understand what incentives are the right incentives in order to continue to drive participation in our portfolio, which then in turn impacts the budget and the way we can deploy the resources of the portfolio. The picture on this slide really just indicates how we've shifted our outreach. We're doing a lot of outreach to share tips and tricks to families and people who are home more, like most of us, to talk to them about energy efficiency tips and things that they can do now, either with the help of our program or on their own. we have initiated a scavenger hunt that children can do. It's not anything that's super new to the industry, but we are trying to find a new way to deploy these tools, both through digital sources and we've had some radio and TV interviews as well to try to get the message out around energy efficiency at this time. Next slide. In terms of the data that we're collecting, we're tracking a variety of different metrics, and so this is just an example of us tracking the applications to our business program by week. And this doesn't really tell us the amount of savings because it's really just telling us the number of applications received. But what it does do is show us the level of interest and activity in our portfolio related to our business program. And you can see there is some up, some down. We had a spike in April in 1 week, and then it kind of went back down to a significantly lower number of applications comparatively year over year. With program changes, different levels of incentives, this doesn't necessarily speak as a one-to-one comparison of what we should expect, but I think the gap between the years does tell a story that we are managing and monitoring as a metric in our program. We're looking at this from a variety of different angles, both on the business and residential side, and just trying to stay on top of having an understanding of what is really happening and tacking this on top of some of the anecdotal information we're gathering from outreach. Next slide. So in terms of what we're finding as a result of the outreach that we're conducting, both with customers, with program allies, with our program staff, and our contractors, we're finding that both customers and allies, that communicating with them in this virtual way is very complex, and the level of interest ranges, of course, from those that are very interested and understand the need and benefit of energy efficiency, down to those who just don't want to be contacted and who find it to be quite a distraction from a serious health concern or community concern that is taking place. Some customers have begun as a business to focus their attention and resources in other places outside of energy efficiency, which is certainly understandable when they have competing priorities related to their resources. And then we've even seen some projects that were scheduled for 2020 that have been postponed or canceled. The trade allies are really the local contractors who implement our program, and we really are working hard to keep a pulse on what their impact is. And we understand that, you know, as they see their work decline outside of our programs, that has a direct impact on their ability to work in our program and also to kind of continue to be the economic engine of the communities that they work in. So it's certainly an area of interest. We've seen, we are tracking, and we've seen some variations. Of course, many of them are laying off people, seeing a decline in their work and also in their revenue. On the residential side, the implementation tools that we have selected as alternatives, the virtual assessments and the web or telephone communication with customers, is largely untested from an energy efficiency perspective. So we are launching it, but we're doing it in a way where we're coordinating closely with our evaluation contractor to make sure that we understand the risks and can set the programs up in a way that's as least risky as possible. Additionally, exploring, and I'll talk more about PPE, but trying to explore when we are able to re-enter homes or facilities, how the variations on what PPE will be required will be managed. Finally, to the extent that there are co-pays associated with our residential programs, we just understand, especially from the statistics that I shared earlier, that many customers just don't have disposable income in order to make those co-pays. So we are trying to factor that into our program plan for the rest of the year to understand how many customers we will realistically be able to serve and what level of copay, or if at all, will be necessary or appropriate for the program. Next slide. So I really just wanted with this slide to quickly cover the fact that everything we're doing really requires some level of looking into the future. There are a variety of risks at play associated with economic markets, both local and globally. The marketing and customer adoption of our programs. We're taking an effort to really revamp our marketing strategy for this year to launch some new marketing campaigns to reach customers with different messaging, of course, coordinated messaging about how the utility can help them. And also the supply chain is something that we are tracking very closely. Street light replacement is a pretty well tried and true program for us. However, we've already seen a delay of at least 2 months in us being able to acquire the materials, the bulbs to replace the lamps to replace the street lights. And that's already been delayed into June due to the manufacturer in California having a delay on the supply. So we're monitoring that, and that does have an impact. Finally, policy and evaluation. Again, as some of these new strategies are not well tested or tried in the energy efficiency space, we are monitoring the risk associated with that and trying to minimize it. Next slide, please.
Kristol, do you want me to show that clip, the image that you gave me at this point?
Not yet. I'm going to start on the next slide, and then I'll pull it up.
Okay, great.
Okay. So this is one of my final slides here. Just wanted to talk about moving forward. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that there will be a recovery. We don't know exactly when. We don't know what the metrics or standards will be for determination that there is a recovery, but that will happen, and we will get back to some sense of normal. There will be some changes, but just wanted to continue with the message of we're in this together, we will recover, and there will be a new sort of rising of our communities and energy efficiency industry. But at the time being, overall, uncertainty is the biggest challenge for moving forward. The customer interface varies from customer to customer, and there's no cookie cutter approach to what will be effective. And so, Jonathan, if you could pull up the photo now. The reason this photo isn't in my slide deck is that this was just released yesterday by the Illinois governor, and it's a plan for restoring Illinois to normal state, and what we're calling Illinois.
Sorry,
Yes.
Karen. Kristol, can you confirm that you can see it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So this is the current plan to restore Illinois to a normal state, and as you can see, there are 5 phases, and the way this will work is that there are zones throughout the state of Illinois, and in any zone, they could be in any one of these 5 phases. So if you can imagine, as a utility that covers such a large geographic area throughout the state, we may have to manage to variations in all of these phases, except for phase 5, which is the full recovery, which includes having a vaccine or largely available treatment in place. If that were to take place, it seems like that would be pretty widespread. But any of the other 4 phases could apply at any of the zones within our service territory. So as we try to put together a utility approach for how we'll get back out there, we're going to have to balance all of these different moving pieces, which just kind of exasperates the level of uncertainty that we already were managing before. We can go back to the slide deck. And so in terms of reopening, we're developing a plan right now which considers safety, PPE, and as Jonathan emphasized, what level of PPE will need to be in place. I think Jonathan talked a little bit about the level of risk at different facilities, and I think we'll have to balance that based on the phases which the health departments locally have determined the zones are in, but then also at the facilities. I think a lot of us have seen on the news that there are some facilities that can be hotspots amongst themselves, like prisons or meatpacking plants. We've had one in Illinois with its first case reported in April, and have seen dozens of cases since then. And so really just being sort of managing and staying on top of what's happening within our community so that we can have the right level of safety and PPE available for our program staff. Finally, I just wanted to say we continue to focus on our core objectives, which include safety, managing these programs to the benefit of our customers, achieving the savings that's necessary, and supporting our local communities. And to Jonathan's point about any type of regulatory relief, in the state of Illinois, we have not seen any regulatory relief yet. It's something that the stakeholder groups in our state have discussed, but we have not seen a lot of movement or traction in that area. And certainly it's something that we think is necessary for further discussion and consideration. And so with that, I will turn it back over to you, Jonathan, to continue the presentation, and happy to answer any questions at the right time.
Thanks, Kristol. So there are two questions for you very quickly. The first is, if we go back to your application slide, do you have an idea about why that spike occurred right there?
We don't know, except that we did run a early completion bonus through Q1 in our small business program. And so depending on the timing of where that overlaps, looks like it's after the end of March, we could have seen a peak in applications or spike in applications around that time. I do know right at the onset of when things were starting to go to shelter in place, we saw a spike of applications in the small business program from program allies considering losing the opportunity to participate in the program if the program were to shut down. But I think as they saw that the program would not shut down, then it kind of leveled out a little bit more.
That makes sense. And then a follow-up, have you had any internal conversations about K-12 programs in the fall? I know that internally there's been some discussion about trying to focus on schools, but where you have any education partnerships, do you know what the status is of those for the fall?
You know, Jonathan, we have had discussions, and most of our discussions have been related to how do we shift our K-12 programs to being more virtual, even if schools are reopened. That we would not necessarily want to be sending program staff into the school as a potential introduction of the virus or anything like that. But now looking at the restore plan for the state of Illinois, schools don't reopen until phase 4, which is pretty far down the line in terms of the metrics that are being tracked, with cases being relatively low. So I think the probability of schools reopening in the fall probably remains to be kind of low, and so we need to consider that as we consider our approach.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you, Kristol. We're going to move on to Karen Guz from San Antonio Water System. And Karen, let me go ahead and get your slides going.
Thanks.
And if you can, there you go. Thank you.
Okay, great. In Texas, you may have heard that we are opening back up, and so schools are not open, but a lot of our businesses are open. Now, despite that, our philosophy in San Antonio, in terms of San Antonio Water System, has been that there is still a lot we can do without a lot of public contact if it's not necessary. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. The challenge for us has been that historically, when we talk about getting people to save water, we viewed it as a deeply personal process. These images that we use a lot sort of evoke that. On the right, you see our team of what we call our conservation consultants who drive these wild-looking trucks all over San Antonio, going to people's homes. And they've been incredibly effective at changing people's attitudes about how much water they need for all kinds of purposes. And we've depended a lot on heavy face-to-face interaction with people to help influence them. And obviously, we have not been able to do that. And we're trying to look really for the foreseeable future about how we can influence people without that personal interaction. Let's go to the next slide. Now, Jonathan had asked me to take a look at our data in terms of program participation and what has happened to it post-COVID. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide. In red, you see the things that have dropped as a result of the COVID. We were doing these irrigation consults face-to-face at people's homes. That stopped immediately. So that's obviously dropped off. We've got a long waiting list of people wanting what I'm going to describe to you next as a modified version of that service. Our irrigation rebates look higher, but that's misleading. Before COVID, we were way ahead of 2019, and it dropped off a cliff because we need the data from the irrigation system in order to offer people a rebate. So we look forward to getting that started again very soon. Interesting thing on our water saver education, it fell off a cliff in March. We had all kinds of events that were just canceled immediately. Now in April, we really saw a huge upsurge in webinar availability and people's interest in webinars. And so people signed up for this Water Saver Rewards program, attended the webinars, took their online quizzes to verify that they participated, and we've just had this surge in people wanting to be in that program, and we're getting thank you emails from people saying we're just thrilled having this available. So that's been a nice post-COVID thing. We never stopped our Plumbers to People program. We do have to go in people's homes, or I should say by we, I mean the plumbers, with PPE. We have not had any of our poverty customers say they don't want that help. It's sort of an emergency program, so we have not stopped that. We've seen a drop-off in our landscape coupons, even though the nurseries are open, but it takes people getting out of their house to go buy plants, so maybe that's why that's dropped off quite a bit. Not dead, but really low compared to same time last year. And then our Water Smart reports are a virtual program, so that one has been growing. Let's go to the next slide. Now, interesting thing though, when we look at our mix of programs is that as effective as we think this face-to-face interaction you see an image of is, we've always viewed it as a scale problem. We serve 1.8 million people. We know we have probably 200,000 irrigation systems at least in our community. So if we can only do 3,300 or so irrigation consults a year, even keeping our schedules full and doing all kinds of marketing to maximize our appointments, that's still a scale problem. So we know those are extremely efficient and effective with people, but we've always said we need other programs that allow us to get to thousands of people. So let's go to the next slide. And honestly, those scalable programs, the ones that we can push out to thousands of people, in a way have been virtual before the whole COVID thing. The Water Smart reports that go to people every month, that's always been a virtual program. It was always viewed as something we could do on a massive scale and get to people who were what I call never takers. They wouldn't sign up for anything. They wouldn't do a consult. They don't come to an event. But interestingly, they'll click open a report. And when you study the data later, it causes them to use less, and they like the report. So a lot of our programs naturally have a virtual component, and that may be something mailed to people, there's an email. And then what we're seeing now in our virtual education that has had to completely replace all our face-to-face events and workshops is that it's a different group of people. When we look at who signed up for this Water Saver Rewards program and the new people, we haven't gotten into the detail of how the demographics are different, but it is a different audience that we're seeing. So this will be a lesson for us when all of this hopefully settles down and we can get back to running our events. I think we're going to keep the webinars. It's taught us that, yes, these virtual things are scalable. We reach different people who were maybe always too busy to come to our events, and now we need to make sure we keep that component in our program mix forever. Let's go to the next slide. Now, a big effort, though, has been that even though we've offered virtual phone consults to try to substitute for this, having an expert come to your house and troubleshoot your irrigation system, frankly, it's been not what people say they need. They really want us to come to the house, get our hands on their irrigation controller, and talk them through it. So we are launching next week no contact irrigation consults. And I just lost the image, but I'm hoping other people can see it. Jonathan, do you know if it's still going?
Unmuting. I have not stopped the share. Can people raise your hands if you can still see the image, please?
It's working on mine. It came back. So it just dropped away for a second and then it came back. So the crux of this, without me going into all the detail, is that we're going to be giving very clear instructions to the customers that you stay in the house, open your garage for us, get us access to the backyard, get us access to the controller, but you stay in the house, we'll be outside we'll talk to you by phone. And that's not negotiable. That's going to be a firm rule that our staff are going to be told, frankly, if they insist on coming out of the house, you're going to have to apologize and leave. Because there are enough people worried about all this that we just need one set of rules. We think we can offer the full service and be very effective this way. Haven't done it yet, but we think this no contact consult is going to go well. Let's go to the next slide. It has not been easy though. We normally depend on that interaction with the person to get them to sign off on permissions on a paper, for example, and we can't do that. So we've created a digital agreement customers will fill out ahead of time. We've revised our scheduling a bit. We've worked out ways that we can trade paperwork for later data entry without everybody being in the office. So it's been sort of a big deal for us, frankly, to work together to come up with what we think are safe procedures and clear procedures, and to adjust what customers will see on the website and by email as we schedule them. There is going to be safety measures. Everyone will be wearing a mask. They'll have sanitizer, sanitizing wipes before they touch anything at the house. Everyone who does this is going to get their temperature checked daily at our headquarters. We will not be sharing vehicles, and we will not be sending two people to anybody's house. So there's some pretty massive changes, but we are optimistic that this is going to be popular with those people who are waiting. And I absolutely know that customer service can't wait for us to get this going because it's hot here in Texas and people want the help. So let's go to the next slide. The other thing we just launched last week is another virtual program we always planned to do. We got a little delay, and this is a campaign. It's an education campaign reminding people, sort of like if you have thermostats, you wouldn't leave it the same all the time in your house, but reminding them that there's a seasonal adjust feature on most irrigation controllers that people don't know about and don't use. It's pretty easy. So we're doing a big education campaign that just started, blasting out monthly emails with a link to a quick how-to video explaining to people how to use the seasonal adjust feature with the tagline, 3 minutes will save you 30% over the course of a year. So this is another example of a scalable program we'd always planned to do that happens to be entirely virtual. Let's go to the next slide.
That's a great open rate, by the way. I'm stunned.
Well, I put it in there because we were stunned too, frankly. We're seeing very high open rates right now. One of the COVID silver linings is that people are more interested in what comes into their inbox. Our e-newsletters that go out every week are having a higher open rate. The Water Smart reports are, and this having a 40% open rate, we were really happy with. We also have a special promotion on our flow sensor incentive right now, and that is also getting at least a 40% open rate, I believe, and then a pretty high click-through rate. So that's a little bit of a silver lining on these virtual programs that we push out, is that maybe people's attention span for them is higher than it used to be. So, so those are the main things that I wanted to cover quickly on how we're trying to adjust. We're very interested, of course, in finding out what's working for others out there in energy efficiency or water efficiency post-COVID, and open to sharing information. So thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Karen. People, please feel free to post questions. In the interest of time, I will be moving on to resource innovations. One moment here. Let's see. There we go. All right, Ashley and Jeff, can you unmute your phones and get ready to present?
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Can you hear me okay?
All right. Yes, I can.
Great. Thanks to everyone who has joined for your time this morning. I'm Ashley Palladino with Resource Innovations, and we're excited to be here to talk with you all today about how we're working with our clients and partners to adapt to our remote environment. Next slide, please, Jonathan. So this morning, we're going to share a bit about who we are, how we've approached the situation we're in, and provide a few examples of the impacts we're facing and how we're pivoting in both the residential and in commercial industrial spaces. Next slide, please. And one more. So we are an implementer and a consulting firm. We deliver both residential and commercial programs and solutions to our clients throughout the Midwest and other states. through our partnerships with utilities across 8 states. We want to take a moment to thank Jonathan and his team at AIQUEOUS. Much of the RI team have been colleagues with Jonathan and several of his team members over the years. In 2017, early on in both of our company's growth, we established our partnership working with AIQUEOUS to collaboratively design and implement our platform and database for income qualified work in Illinois. We've worked closely over the years to continue to build and adapt that system. And as we'll talk about today, those efforts are key to our success in shifting to this remote environment to support and facilitate data capture, tracking, and reporting across all of our efforts. Next slide, please. So Jeff Crittenden and I will be presenting today. Jeff oversees our C&I work, and I oversee our residential work nationwide. Lauren Casantini, our president, and Atticus Doman, our planning and design expert, have provided critical leadership to all of our COVID-19 pivots. All right, so next slide, please. So before we share some specific examples of how we've shifted, we want to share some of the approach and thinking that has gone into our efforts. We are all hearing a lot about virtual assessments. It is the buzzword for utility energy efficiency at the moment. There is a lot of great work and planning that is taking place on the tools and technologies associated with that, which we're also working on. But today we wanted to have a discussion that applies to everyone in all program designs. What we found is that incorporating effective remote strategies into program delivery is about more than just a tool or platform. It's about the people, how tools and strategies are being used, and why you're doing it. So today we're going to share how we've been able to pivot immediately across all types of programs, not just those that are more traditional fit for virtual assessments. Next slide, please. So to start, we want to highlight a few of the guiding objectives that we've kept in mind during this time. Safety is, of course, our #1 priority. We're also focused on delivering high-quality customer service to our customers, as this is a challenging time for many. We're considering all different ways of mitigating the impacts to our program production in 2020. And we're keeping in very close contact with our clients and partners while recognizing that everyone is being pulled in so many directions and everyone needs up-to-date information and guidance without it being a further drain on them. Next slide, please, Jonathan. Next, we wanted to highlight some of the actions we've taken and goals we've had as we put together strategies and program enhancements. We're leveraging our existing resources and partners' expertise, seeking new ways of working with our partners who may have had their typical activities suspended. We're looking at different ways to help build better efficiency and resiliency into our programs, whether it's immediate and short-term or longer-term and long-lasting. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty of when we'll return to the field, which will of course impact what we do. We're considering multiple scenarios and developing strategies to continue to adapt and build on what we're doing now. There's also a lot of investment being made on these shifts, and we want to make sure that where appropriate, that investment is contributing to long-lasting change. And finally, we're developing plans that we can work. Even though they may change every week or potentially every month, we have established specific targets and activities to guide us through this. Next slide, please. So next slide, please, Jonathan. Thank you. So what has this all meant for developing our virtual solutions? Here we have 3 examples of ways you can incorporate these virtual elements into your program designs. On the far left, many of our programs deliver comprehensive home retrofits, and there's no substitute for that in the home activity. However, we have been able to identify targeted ways we can make the process more efficient, preparing us for getting back out into the field. While comprehensive audits will still be necessary before the work can proceed once we get back out into the field, we're incorporating pre-audit activities now that are helping to expedite that process. This can be as simple as data collected via a phone call, or as savvy as customers providing data, photos, and other information via a platform. Next are process changes. Many programs can benefit from shifting some aspect or part of program delivery to a virtual solution. For example, to address post-installation inspections, you may find that contractor submitted photos that have geolocation information tagged in them provide meaningful verification of installed products. Additionally, you may choose to survey customers via phone after installation to not only ask about their satisfaction, but product or measure function and performance to determine again whether or not it was installed. And finally, there are many program designs and approaches that can shift more fully into virtual engagements. Outreach efforts can bring more customers into your pipeline. They can help identify specific opportunities and even facilitate the do-it-yourself energy efficiency products. On this one, Jeff is going to share a few C&I examples here in a moment. So as you can see, there are many flavors of virtual solutions, or how you may approach incorporating your own virtual assessment into your portfolios. It may be a targeted effort, it may be a process change, or a full shift, but it really will depend on your program design, your goals, and your customers' needs. Next slide, please. So this is just a simple map of how you may assess your own situation, need, and opportunity. First, you would define the challenge you're facing. You would then determine your ultimate goal for what you're trying to achieve. Identify the opportunity to pivot, develop your solution and how you'll do it, determine how you'll implement this, when, for how long, how broad, and then finally evaluate and adapt. Jonathan, if you could click once more. So overlaid is an example to walk through what this might look like. So for example, if you've canceled all of your assessments and direct installs, you may be primarily concerned about loss of savings, among other things. Your opportunity would be to deliver savings in some way to your customers who are in the pipeline, those who have had their appointments canceled. You may have the opportunity to simply increase energy saving kit distribution immediately and quickly leveraging your existing offering to extend it to these customers in particular. But later you may consider adding in a virtual engagement to pre-screen customers and identify their specific needs.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Sorry, Ashley. It sounds like Zoom is, sounds like Zoom is giving everybody some trouble. Would you like me to move to the next slide?
Thanks. No, that's okay. I'm just going to wrap up this point. Thank you for that. I had my phone that's back up there. In summary on this slide, it's important to walk through not only what you're immediately facing, but what you're hoping to accomplish by shifting your strategy or launching an entirely new effort. You may find that you have an existing offering or solution within your portfolio and that you don't need to set up a whole new effort to achieve your goal. By walking through the step-by-step assessment process, even though it may seem a bit like a no-brainer, you can craft a solution that works to both address your immediate need as well as set yourself up for further enhancement. All right, so now we can go to the next slide. I'm going to spend, actually one more, I'm going to spend just a few moments summarizing the residential specific efforts our team has been focused on, as I've been touching on several of these efforts already. You can go to the next one, Jonathan. The first are those efforts that can maximize savings both now and in the coming months. We've talked a bit about kit and product distribution, which can provide those immediate savings. Again, expanding your reach through wider distribution or targeting customers with select products now who will then later receive additional services or follow-on efficiency projects. In the multifamily space, we're really looking at this as an opportunity to expand. There may be additional opportunities for you to provide really comprehensive retrofits and services through these limited interaction spaces. They may be, again, it's really going to depend on the property. You may find opportunities to address whole building measures like insulation and air sealing. You may target central plant measures, possibly even common areas if you can ensure limited customer interaction. So multifamily could be an opportunity for you to expand. Next slide, please. And then finally, as we've also already talked about, there are a lot of opportunities in the residential space to incorporate virtual elements that may provide long-term process improvements. Prior to assessments, confirming home readiness and collecting some data prior to visiting the home may expedite your project timeline. There may be customer outreach and communication that can help with project scoping or identifying specific installs that may be needed. Or you may simply increase your connection with your customers to further build your pipeline and generate needs. Inspections are another area that are likely to shift, and we'll have to leverage different ways of capturing data. It could be photos, geotagging, other adjusted procedures that provide you information you were otherwise going on site to collect. You may also incorporate other process like enhanced training or tools to contractors to confirm the steps that they took, which may address some, possibly not all, but some of your inspection needs. And so to wrap up on residential before we shift to C&I, I want to highlight that there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no one virtual assessment that will address all of our challenges, but there are a lot of opportunities to pivot to help us better manage now and over the next several months. Narrowing in on what you're really trying to achieve when you think about shifting to virtual engagement will help you develop a plan that can continue to evolve and adapt over time. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jeff Crittenden, who will be speaking to our commercial and industrial efforts.
Thank you, Ashley. Just a check, Jonathan, can you hear me? You're coming in loud and clear, Jeff. Thank you. Awesome. Well, I guess if you go to the first slide, I think from a programmatics perspective, you know, we all ask ourselves, you know, what is the learning moment or learning point? And I would say for me, and just even through the course of this conversation, there's a striking difference between residential and commercial programs I never really appreciated before. I mean, there's certainly commonalities and some differences that have really come to light, but especially as it relates to on-site activities. And so if we just focus in on commercial and industrial programs and hone in on the specific activities that require on-premise and or face-to-face, which would be, you know, outreach, assessments, installations and post-installation inspections, we've picked up on a number of silver linings that we'd like to share with you, and kind of talk about these in more detail as we've all kind of have this shared experience of, you know, what to do in the last couple months. So, you know, with regards to, you know, outreach, one of the activities that I would encourage you to do, and you probably may not have done it in a while, is to, you know, go back and map out, you know, a programmatic process. And so, you know, for, you know, sake of illustration, a custom process, you know, taking all of the, you know, landmark and key events within that process. And what you're going to find, interestingly and encouragingly, you're going to find that a lot of those activities are do not necessitate on-premise type activity. And so it gives you a benchmark for, you know, where to recalibrate your efforts. And as we've done, have done that, we have seen where we can refocus or reemphasize, you know, pipeline fulfillment. And, you know, if you think about a pipeline, you know, coming into March, I mean, there's really never been anything more precious than that list of existing projects that need immediate attention. And so, you know, fortunately for us, what we've walked away is by applying focus on those pipeline projects, we've been able to, you know, keep our program steady and at, I guess, a steady state without any major interruption. And then also, you know, as we initially, and I'm sure everyone on this phone has gone through this whole exercise of, you know, what's essential versus non-essential, you know, immediately out of the gate, you know, what was the thing, you know, healthcare, assisted long-term care. That was, you know, even though it's an essential industry, it was an industry that was going to be too bogged down to, you know, take any calls or field any energy efficiency inquiries. Food processing, that's another essential industry, but you know, we found that, well, that they're ramping up production, so they should be more than welcome to, get our calls. Or, maybe another example would be primary metals, not a non-essential industry, and maybe, one that's probably scaled back. And so throughout all this, we're making a lot of assumptions. And one of the things we've recognized over the last couple of months is to not assume. I mean, just because it is a hospital doesn't mean the chief engineer is not interested in talking to you about an energy efficiency project. And the same could be true with, food processing and primary metals. And so it's really come down to, who's receptive and who's non-receptive, and to, politely inquire, not assume, based upon, what preconceived notions we've determined over time. Assessments, that is one that, obviously, we're trying, I think we're all trying to do virtual versions, and in many cases, those have proven to be very viable substitutes. One of the things we've noticed is that, if you're physically in a plant and you walk up to a chiller, you can visualize, a lot of different things. And in many cases, it's more of a capital nature or a custom project in nature. Whereas over the phone, through a little screen or through somebody's phone, and then having talked to them about their operations, it's more conducive to identifying operational opportunities. And that hasn't been the worst thing in the world, because in many cases you want to do the low-hanging fruit anyway and save capital for, somewhere down the line within the long-term process. So that's one observation that we've made. As far as installation is concerned, I think the one thing that I would want to, relay, our contractors, of many of them, the trade allies have shifted to, their service-based functions, or in many cases dramatically so. But there still is construction taking place. We've actually had a fair number of projects that were still in the process of being installed, and that can continue through actually well into April. And so, while it's definitely skeleton and scaled back some, there is definitely construction activity still taking place. Post-installation inspections, we've been doing virtual inspections. I think the main thing that this has really driven us towards, and something we've been meaning to do, is leverage. We've never had access to as much data as we have in today's world, and using statistical methods in lieu of labor-intensive manual intervention has something that we've been talking about as an industry for a while. But this environment has forced us down those paths to leverage statistical methods that we've been meaning to do. Next slide. So I'll just apologize in advance, and for those of you that are probably now saying I was told there wouldn't be any math or energy engineering, that's certainly the case. I'll just say this is meant to be illustrative, and that this is a screen capture from a control system, and that once upon a time something like this would be on somebody's desktop in the deep recesses of a plant floor, whereas today through apps, smart tablets, ability to be accessible through multiple users, this specific one was screen shared through a virtual assessment. And so we're able to look at the inner workings of a process, in this particular case, a refrigeration process, and see the set points, which we can make real-time adjustments. I think we've always had that ability in the past, even in face-to-face, but this has really forced us to say, let's try something and see what happens, and see how the system performs in more ways than we've ever achieved in the past. Next slide.
Hey, Jeff, just a quick question for you. Is this something you can see on a screen share with somebody, so that remotely you can be working with them together on this?
That's correct, and that's exactly what this is meant to be illustrative. Is that, you know, we through a virtual assessment, we were looking at it together and looking at the cause and effect and making changes on the fly, and that's you know, something that I think we've done in bits and pieces in the past, but I think right now it's forced us to do that in a more focused manner. Thanks. Virtual treasure hunts. And so one of the, you know, C&I programs that is, you know, very heavily reliant upon, you know, face-to-face activity when you look at the individual components, you know, such as workshops, you know, one-on-one treasure hunts, you know, energy scans, et cetera. You know, obviously we've had to look at virtual, you know, versions of that. And this, if we just kind of hone in on treasure hunts specifically, this is an example of one that was done virtually, and a screenshot from a nice little utility called Mural, M-U-R-A-L, which allows you to, you know, create virtual sticky notes and kind of manipulate and move them around the screen in much the same way we would do this in person on a whiteboard. And this is, you know, with the right engagement, with the right you know, with the right folks on the phone, you know, that, you know, we're able to tear apart somebody's process and put it back together and see where the operational efficiencies exist. We've been able to find this to be a highly effective manner of conducting treasure hunts, and not really seeing much loss in terms of, you know, not being able to do this in person with you know, in the same conference room. Early feedback from customers has proven this out as not just an acceptable alternative, but then also, you know, something that may prove out to be more preferable in some cases. Obviously depends upon the customer. We're gauging the temperature as we go along. Next slide. So if we look at, you know, the treasure hunts, and we've done quite a few of them. I think the number in March was something to the tune of 20, and on a daily basis. And so what's worked out well is, you know, once again, the real-time adjustments to systems, being able to do that, and being able to make that part of the process has been something that, you know, we've been able to achieve immediate low-hanging fruit savings. And then just the sheer nature of it, you know, the convenience factor, the timeliness of schedule, you know, when we've done these in the past, you know, in person, you know, when we do like 2 or 3 in a week, we consider that a victory, considering, you know, all the travel and coordination involved, you know, but being able to do these online, you know, in a virtual environment, we could do 2 to 3 a day. And that has increased, you know, to do 20 in a month is definitely more activity and touch points than we've ever experienced in an SCM program in the past. So that's worked out well. Now, what's worked out, you know, obviously, any in-person dynamic is lost. I mean, there's no substituting face-to-face relationships. You know, within the you know, the customer collections or the groups of customers within a cohort, you lose that. You know, the peer pressure, and then just even them developing their own relationships and socializing best practices has, you know, we're trying to fill those gaps. And then lower in-person attendance, you know, with, you know, skeleton crews in some of the manufacturing facilities, you know, some of the decision makers have had to, you know, redivert their efforts. And so we've had, you know, I'll say less attendance. Instead of 4 or 5, we've had more like 2 or 3. Continuous, so suggestions, if you're doing virtual treasure hunts, virtual assessments, anything virtual in a, you know, I'll say a strategic or even a normal C&I program, you know, newsletters, news flashes, I mean, that is what we have done specifically to socialize those best practices. As though, you know, customer X did this, and send it out to the cohort of customers so that they can see, you know, what is being done and what they can socialize towards their plant. We found that to, you know, kind of fill that gap of not having the, you know, in-person workshops. And then the interactive software. And so, you know, within SCM, we model, we use, we create a model of a plant, getting that in their hands, the customer's hands, sooner rather than later, so that there's like an interactivity, has proven as well to keep them engaged, throughout this whole distraction. And we found that to be an effective tool. So those are two continuous improvement suggestions. As it relates to future adjustments, to think futuristically, there are this obviously is starting to get us to think in terms of like hybrid approaches. We see the cost effectiveness of virtual activity and combining that with traditional methods of face-to-face and the workshops. We can start to visualize different things. If there's one thing I want you to walk away from is think in terms of the geographical flexibility now to expand an offering like SCM. We've already had national customers inquire about that in terms of doing their sister plants spread out across the country, which we've never really done before. We've always kind of thought of SCM or anything within a tight region or within a tight service territory. Now we can start to think and expand and help our customers do more things on a national level, leveraging the tools and the things that we've learned throughout this process. And I will, I guess, you take questions now or later as appropriate.
Thank you, Jeff. What's going to happen now is I will skate over some of the slides that I had prepared, and I wanted to focus on just a couple of things for people. So when you get this, you'll be able to see that we have some data on our client performance. We're seeing declines pretty much across the board on programs, including online. The online rebates at least are maintaining mostly participation, but you can see weatherization programs and even EV programs are seeing much lower performance, just for a consistent story. Instead of walking through a process on digitizing programs, I want to highlight a few things very quickly for everybody. The first is to think about user stories. One of the things that we haven't typically seen is the creation of a user story, and building these out in a comprehensive level is really critical to creating a digital program. So the columns are, as a customer, installer, program manager, what do I need and what's the objective of that need? And the reason is because, in a way, because people have so much access to cloud technology, you can all consider designing systems. But the problem is that adding on a feature that you've seen in one system to your list of things that you're looking for isn't necessarily straightforward. So for example, if you're looking for the ability for your customers to provide rankings or ratings on trade allies, the exact reason that you're looking for to do that and the exact way in which you want that to be implemented has a huge impact on system developments. And so it's really important for you to make a comprehensive table for any given program that you're thinking about what those user stories are. Identify everybody who's going to be participating in or using your digital platform, and then what are the stories around that participation. Then you're going to build a swim lane diagram where every lane is essentially one participant or one class of participants, and then you're going to be identifying your key yes, no decision points or go, no go decision points. And then you also want to flag things that you want to have happen automatically. In terms of data mapping, I would reduce the limit of data collection for fun and really focus on one of 5 categories. The reason that you're collecting information is to make you more effective at recruitment, for you to verify that this customer should be participating, to confirm eligibility of the customer, the installation, and the conditions of the installation, why you want to report, and what you have to do for compliance. Like any data you're asking for needs to fit into one of those 5 things. And other data is essentially for fun, but adds cost without a lot of value. Make sure that you use the same field name to collect the same data across programs. Do things similarly. For some programs, don't collect full name, and then other programs collect first name and last name. Do it consistently so that you can get a consistent database.
And remember that a relationship database is best because you may have many to ones. You may have multiple measures per project. You may have multiple projects per customer. And so depending upon whether you're using Access or some other data platform, make sure that you're thinking about those relationships. Automation is a whole conversation that we can't cover now, and I can schedule a follow-up conversation for those who are interested in. What's important also, given all the conversations that we've had, is what are the critical pieces that you're offering to a homeowner or to the business? Is it the technical eyes kind of behind and on top of the homeowner eye as they walk around? Is it being able to capture information about the home to assess conditions, to motivate people, documenting things that have occurred? Try to think about what is it that you're doing around the person who's actually in the location to figure out how to design your system. And then finally, everything that we're talking about has a lot of failure points. The homeowner is not going to do a blower door test. They're not going to do a duct blaster. And so depending upon the way that you've got savings to claim, you may need to reassess what measures you're promoting and strategies you're promoting. And then finally, there are specific classes of customers that this is leaving out. The elderly, the disabled, especially people who are suffering from the digital divide. And one person provided us a comment that there are minority or other disadvantaged communities that are being proportionally hit by COVID. The types of approaches that we're talking about in a lot of these circumstances can also leave those people out. And so how are we going to make sure that these migration strategies don't also continue to exclude those communities who have historically had trouble participating in these programs? So that's all that I wanted to cover. And we're going to, have encouraged people to be posting questions. If there are others that can be submitted, that would be great. So I'm looking for questions. I know that one was posted previously about, what have been the most effective methods for companies to stay close to their clients. And so if you all think about your outside third-party support and your own staff, how have you most effectively stayed in touch with them? And Ashley, can you take just a minute to answer that question?
Sure. We work with clients and partners both via regular phone calls, so those we have maintained during this time. We also just pick up the phone quickly when there's something urgent to work through. So we've shifted a bit from really sticking to email communication to having a lot more phone interaction with our clients and partners. We also send regular updates via emails, trying to pull out really concise bullets, but overshare as much as possible so they have something to point to if they need that. But again, highlighting those really concise points. And so I think all options are on the table, but just regular communication and always checking in with clients and partners. Is this too much? Is this meeting their needs? So I would encourage you to have a really productive conversation about what it is they're looking for and how it might be addressed.
Thanks, Ashley. I'd like to open this question to the panelists. The question from Fred Wu is, can we stay virtual post-COVID, and does that help or hurt the industry? So in other words, do you think that maintaining aspects of virtual are beneficial to the industry going forward, or do we lose things that are important for us to maintain?
I can start, Jonathan.
Thank you, Kristol. Great.
I think as a utility, we are always looking for ways to reach a broader group of customers. And I think that the virtual solutions have the potential to stick around in our portfolio post-COVID because customers want to engage in different ways. There's a wide diversity in the way that customers are interested in engaging with us, and that continues to change. And I think this needs to be an offering for our customers. So I do think it's something that will stick with long term. I also think that since much of what we do is considered useful based on its cost effectiveness, we may find that the cost of acquiring these customers may be much lower than the traditional face-to-face. And so we may need to incorporate it to most effectively deploy the resources that we have.
Thank you, Kristol. And Karen, can you respond? And then I'm going to wrap up.
Yeah, I have a similar comment about that. Honestly, on our face-to-face interactions with customers, there were some of our customers who were never going to engage that way. And that was part of what we were recognizing before with trying to scale to other options. As much as people like us coming out to their house or their business, there's some of them who weren't scheduling it before COVID. And so we always needed these virtual options that we can push out on a scale, and it's a different interaction, but if it's positive and we can have data showing that that's effective, then we need to use it. So my feeling is that we are all going to look forward to getting back to face-to-face interactions, but we're going to keep what we learn from our virtual time and probably be better for it as we find we're reaching, as I mentioned, for example, a different audience on the webinars than the people who took the time to show up, say, to an event.
Thank you, Karen. And with that, we're going to wrap up the webinar. I would like to thank everyone who presented today for your time in preparing your talks. Again, you gave people a lot of context and information for what's going on with you. To attendees, I hope that you found this valuable. And I want to thank you for spending 90 minutes of your time with us today. As I mentioned, I did record the session this time. I see the little button that tells me that I did. So I will be stopping the recording and I will be sending around the link to everybody so that you will be able to access it later. I'll be sending it out to prior registrants and attendees as well. So everyone continue to stay well, stay safe. Think about the different levels of risk and the different strategies to deploy and make sure that you are taking care of us and taking care of yourselves and taking care of your customers. And we will all continue to work through this together. So again, thanks very much and take care. Bye-bye.